Crickets like to be cozy, don't they? I'm just going to continue to watch this thing all devolve and do really not a whole lot. And that's going to be our problem. And it's going to continue to be our problem. And there's really nothing more I can say about that for everybody that wants to make an excuse not to do something to stop something. Whatever it is. You don't have to make a big old deal about it. Just find something you don't like that's going on and fix it. I'm finding that we're a people, and this may be everywhere, because I just not even going to go jump over there, but I think I just saw that Angela Merkel just went back into office. I mean, what are people thinking? And maybe they're not. And maybe that's our problem. We don't have a thought in our brain. We don't have a right thought in our brain. We got programming in our brain. We got programming in our brain that's been put there for all our lives, and maybe and longer, generations, slow and incremental. Pretty interesting to watch all this, and I can only hope there's a few of us that continue to plug, and some of you wanting to get involved and just do what you need to do. Figure out what it is, and stop making excuses, and stop trying to sound like all philosophical about what you think you know, because you really don't know a darn thing, actually. And even so, even if you were right about all the conundrums you find, how's that going to solve the problem that you're facing? You can sit there and contemplate your navel until it's all red and raw and bleeding. It will not solve the problem around you. And this is the dynamic of life, it seems. This hasn't been the utopia and cannot be made the utopia. What it is a contention, a continuing contention between those that want to take advantage and those that just want to be left alone. And so the ones that want to be left alone are not at peace to be at peace. And that's the bottom line. I don't know how to respond to all that. BTW RLM 233 for those of you on Prodcast, Pastcast, or the recast on UCY.tv on Thursday again. And that's just the code for the search engines. Put in Behind the Woodshed or Real Liberty Media. That number, and you should be able to get the content links. So you can go to the places I'm going to be talking about to see more. I don't even come close to talking to the things that even come in my mind. By the time I'm here today, I'm barely hanging on to everything, how I'm going to go through the tabs. I just got basic ideas, and it's all just utilizing the so-called news that they tell us as a direction to bring together ideas of how to show you it's all around us that we're being told of all the areas we can engage that are wrong or how the systems are put in place that make it wrong. I see so many people doing things that, I mean, I don't want to move off too far into it, but I just was watching a video this week of a hearing, and I don't think there was maybe except for the criminal that was considered an administrative law judge, and the cohort, the complainer for the county, I don't think anybody in the room may have actually known what they were witnessing with regard to what the people they were attempting to stop from committing crimes against property owners. I don't think anybody in the room understood what was going on. There's a whole other different level of play going on. And I say most people don't see it. In fact, I don't see anybody that actually sees it. I see it. In other words, it's learnable what they do. These techniques they're doing them right in front of you. And you have to really pay attention to that point. And here's the point about it. Oh, I don't want to learn about the legal system. I don't want to learn about the courts. I don't want to go there. Well, folks, they're doing those techniques in every sector of your life, everywhere. And I'm going to end right there because I just go off. I'll just go off on this, and I won't maybe say much to anybody because you really don't understand. You think you know, but you really don't. And I don't want to put myself on some pedestal because I don't know what I don't know, but I do know what I see is what's going on that people are missing. And I know I can relate it over to other studies. The studies you end up running through when you start to find out what is really going on here, that all of a sudden stop making sense. And you got to go make sense of it. And there's a sense to make of it, but it's not in the sense that you're going to understand the subject matter. It's in the sense of how the people that put it there got it there and underneath your nose, right in front of your face. As I was saying, in this hearing, I'm looking at a video, and I assume it was 100% right, or just in the camera, right to the internet, so it wasn't played with. Everyone got to start all worrying about what your sources are anymore, even on the video. You can't even tell what you're looking at. And that was another psyop working on you. Makes it you know that it can happen, but you still have to look for the truth. But I accept this as the representation of what happened, and I didn't see hardly anybody understand what the two people were doing in that room that were harming the property owner. And this is a serious, serious defect in us. This is these are knowledges that people wouldn't put up with. When they see that stuff, they wouldn't put up with it a long time ago. And yet we accept it as it's the authority. I see it as authority. You look at it as authority. Those of you that question say it's authority, but don't know how, and don't know why, and don't know how to understand how it's still winning the day, despite your overt, vociferous complaining and objection. Again, you can be in a prison, and they'll let you scream your brains out. And if you get too loud and too long, they just stick it in a little bitty, they'll put you in a small room with it. You don't even get to talk to nobody. You just scream to yourself all the time. You're free to speak. It doesn't mean you're free. It just means you're free to speak. And this is another little tactic they've done. Oh, we got free speech. You think you're free. And then you find out that even that freedom of speech isn't free. Someone's going to decide whether you're free, whatever you say. And then you see even now today, you can lie. That's how free the speech got. That you can be lied to, and that's okay. And when you tell the truth, they can throw you in some hole. And people aren't paying attention to this whole dynamic and don't understand its roots, cause, or how it came to be, why it continues to persist. And until people start doing that, the day is going to be a real long day for y'all. I mean, it ends up being a real long life for me, because now I'm pit against it. Somehow I'm pausing, getting a little contemplative about pit against it, because I see people getting run down, and I can't help but want to help them, even though I can't. I can help them to a point, but I can't do all of it. This is all of y'all. If you don't know about property, you are property, folks. If you don't defend the property, you're someone's property. And people kind of miss this. You are presumed a property. So if you don't have the right answer for yourself, it's over right there. And I see hardly anybody that has the right answer. Oh, they got lots of ideas, but they don't have the right answer in the context. Well, I shouldn't have to do that. Well, you shouldn't, but you are. You're not listening about what I'm telling you about being in a occupied territory. You're just missing that whole point. I mean, you fully understand it, and how I've been able to prove it to you, just to give you an idea where to go look. There's other proofs. I can only do so much behind the woodshed on a weekend, on the 2 hours. If I was just thinking about all that I have to talk about. I'm already not even on my tabs yet, but all the stuff I got to talk to, I'd never get to everything, and I don't even know if I'm getting to how the thematic connections are working throughout the broadcast anymore. I'm getting to some, but if some of you that listen to me a long time, you'll realize that from the beginning to the end of the broadcast, I loop it back around, and I'm proving the same at the beginning at the end. It happens every week. Even when I'm not doing it completely, there's a loop back all the time. And to get to my tabs, there's been a loop back going on. One of the things that we're under, and one of the tactics that are pervasive and what people learn, and also realize, I was talking to a good friend, that the people aren't even aware of the tactics they use to advance the agenda. They just think they're doing something good. And these are honest dupes. They're all over the place. They literally do not understand what they're doing. They're just brought up. It's like a little kid bringing up a little goat, being brought up to do a certain thing, and they think that's normal. And it is normal to them, and it's normal to the system that they're going to be fostered and encouraged to persist, but it may not be right. And they don't have that principle in them. And when you don't have that principle to check it, neither do you have the responsibility in you to check it. It continues, and they think they're doing okay, when in fact, as I've told you over and over, you can see these people in the system now, in what they call government. It's actually governance, because you're not even in a government. That they kind of run the day, rule the day, and you have no defense against it. And all we have is complaining. What do they call it? The gnashing of teeth? That's all we have. Now, we could have more, but we choose to be there, too. And this is a problem. But one of the main themes and one of the main powers in the world, and I touch it lightly. I just touch a lot of this stuff lightly. It all depends on what your study level is. Will depend on how you will agree with this. You may actually turn off. I've heard you enough. I don't want to listen no more. In fact, I've already lost 10 minutes. I lost half the audience that came here just to hear the next big sensation. This is how they get us. You don't stick around long enough to hear it. I try to get to the point, although I've also off my tabs, but the point is the point. I'm continuing a discussion here of how it's done how you get done and how you allow it to you do yourself. And this is a long-term thing that we were brought up into. We don't understand, like we can be trained to do things that are on an agenda that makes us think we're doing it right, and it's violating people at every turn. It is no different than you live up in a life and you have expectations that have been put in you that you continue to allow that you thought was normal, and it's not. And this is a memory loss over time. I mean, the memory of the principle. Why we're here, how we got here, all this stuff. It used to be more common knowledge in people. Not common sense, but the common knowledge. Common sense doesn't exist now in a state where the entirety of everybody who you go to is insane. And you didn't notice that. And then you got into a place where you thought you could argue with that. Why do you think you can argue with an insanity? It's pretty fascinating. But there's been a power, a literal power in the world, and there's powers underneath this, and there's powers behind that, that I've been kind of tracking, and I only touch on them because it's you have to do a big, deep background study to see the veracity of the things I'm telling you. But when you see the international law that bears upon all this, that's in writing, and whether you believe it or whether you believe it affects you, people are using it to affect you, is the point. When you notice these things for yourself, when you finally do the deeper study, you realize what's at play. You realize what people use to be authorities for what is at play. It's totally outside of your belief system, your utopia, your construct, your definitions, outside of everything you think. Partly because you have no actual power. Now, the power in the world is beyond us, I think. But the power that works through that has been a power throughout, and it comes relevant because of all the things I tell you. I could care less about it at one level. I could care less about people's belief systems. There's lots of people with lots of belief systems. And all that I could care less about. This one is organized enough to hurt you. And this one is organized enough to impose itself in a forceful way, though you think you're doing it voluntarily. Even if you don't think you're engaging it. Because it hits you in different places. And when you find the words, the expressions, the terminology consistent across the board, you can pretty well bet it's coming from the same root system that I've been focused on because of, what would I say here? What would be the list? Collaboration, coordination, the need for it, the consensus policy network, how they undermine you in your rights by taking authorities that don't exist where you don't know, and so they take you authority to do international code enforcements on your property, where they take away and you don't even know you have a Fourth Amendment right anymore. The judiciary that does reflexive law, the same judiciary and bar members of which are in their higher organization at the international level are actually the advisors to this same organization in the world. If you don't think this is connected through, and we can point to all the evil villains, and I'll just point out another one, and something I told you last year was coming, and to my astonishment yesterday, we're still here, unless this is a new world, folks, we're still here, right? It's past the 23rd. We were supposed to be hit by Nibiru. We were supposed to see the dawning of the new devil age and all this. Yeah, well, it didn't happen, right? And so, but I was telling you that last year these people were telling us there was going to be a big deal on the 23rd relative to a religious organization and the reformation of it from a schism that happened 500 years ago. And remember, yesterday was apparently the Jubilee of Jubilees. Did you hear anything about that? I've been astonished. I couldn't find anything about it. I've been wanting to see how they were going to pull all this stuff off at one time, as it wasn't going to be earth-shattering in the obvious. It was going to be very monumental in the invisible, if you will. But there was no news, and that almost makes it better to me than I would have thought when I started thinking about it. The silence right in our face of the power. but I found out some information. What they were talking to us about the 23rd, I only found one important story on. Relative to the Catholic Church and the Protestants, making that treaty to combine and reunify the Catholic Church after the schism created by Luther or the Lutherans, which also now binds itself up. There is no news about this point for the 23rd. I bring this up because this organization called the Catholic Church and its leader, the Pope, is instrumental, whether if you didn't know this about it or not, you've heard me talk about it for 2 years running coming into this time. It's instrumental in supporting the United Nations, its agenda, its human rights, its Agenda 23rd, and everything that is no good for people underneath the cover of being a peaceful religion. This organization also uses it to do its own economics, its own politics, its own everything in the world like any other government. And yet it sits beside a government, so it doesn't have to put up with all the nonsense that you see at the UN, but it sits as an advisory body within the UN. Its policy since the schism was to reunify the church and make, again, the one world church. One world order, one world church, global governance is why I even talk about this so-called religion. But it has a bigger play going on in the history of man, and so we have to look at that part. This is one of the key organizations, if not the underlying key organization to what's going on in the world today to bring on all the nonsense you see. And what's interesting is inside that body, it's not so cool, even though there's supposed to be a unity and a filling of the schism between the Lutheran breakaway question. There's still now the only document I could find regarding this important matter. It's not sewn up inside. There's some people that are not liking it. It's the only document I could find on the 23rd. What I did find is that there's something going to happen next month. Going to be the fulfillment of this whole thing, not on yesterday. Why it's important is because this unity thing I keep telling you about on the UN unity is important to keep track of. And I said you don't want unity in this regard. But this is the focus of most of the UNity and what's attempting to be done. That to remind you, in 2017, another report, go through the tabs now, hopefully Catholics and Protestants to commemorate Reformation anniversary. This was a story that was done a while back in anticipating what was going to happen this year. I want to revisit this because there's some interesting information in this regarding the discussion of what happened when at the time it wasn't understood that the Pope would attend or not, when this Reformation celebration, so-called, it's almost like celebrating a divorce and still living together in a way, was going on. There was an interesting descriptions here. I recently visited Wittenberg, where Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon worked together. Posters are found in the whole city center. Quote, Luther 217, 500 years of Reformation. Wittenberg is getting prepared by remodeling and gardening. It looks like a big happening will take place. There are also other posters there saying theme year 2014, Reformation and politics. Now, you got to kind of keep track of all these things that are agreeing here. That this is not this whole movement here is not just about a religious belief. This is about the entirety of your life, essentially. And I tell you, politics, you can try to change that over to police. Politics is police. Policy, no law, policy. Governance sits in there. Police, policy, and you have commerce. That's where it sits in the politics of this. These are all themes I've told you over and over behind Woodshed to point you to all the subject matters you can look at that are going to be controlled and outside of what you will have authority for, but also is, if you can keep your distance from it, you can create a real separation. You will have a better opportunity to not be brought in and not be presumed to be brought in. And this is partly to tie this in, why I found mining law or property law, understanding what property law and property disposal and the underlying property relationships and the estoppels that build into there to be all important to understand, and what I focused on and seems so far to be the thing that will do what I thought it would, and what I tell you that it does, and it's the thing under attack always, because if they can destroy a property, they can destroy you. You have nothing to protect if you have no property, and you don't have any property where all the nature would be you should have at least yourself. You then kind of impliedly prove you have no inheritable blood. You have no blood that you can rely on. And so there's a whole deeper thing going on. But here we have Reformation and politics. And what's interesting, I was just doing in an emergency paperwork, I did a equitable response to something, and one of the remedies in equity is reformation. So it puts an interesting twist a little bit on this in my mind as I was reading it. Reformation is an authority, typically a judge in an equity court, coming in and in a writing, reforming or amending that writing to say what it ought to have said under the judgment of that equity court. And so this word reformation isn't just like a reforming of something old. This can be a rewriting to the determination of someone who has the power to do so and does so, essentially just does so. And so when you understand the terms better about this, well, at least for me, I don't know, for me, I have, like I said, a couple tracks running all the time about what is actually going on. What are they talking about? And in each context, you have to reformation in the fact of bringing something together, reforming an old, reformation in the concept of equity law, where they're actually having an authority that could come in and essentially amend a prior writing to say what it thinks it ought to say, based on whatever, who knows on that part. Reformation on maybe the more neutral concept, where you're the non-political one that you come into, and more again, it's akin to the kumbaya unity. It's not politically based. We have a lot of ideas here that are played, but you see reformation and politics, and I have to highlight this because the article highlights it. It puts it in caps. This is a conjunction of politics, policy, police, commerce, and whatever that reformation was wanting to pull together. And so we're looking at just that phrase right there. The theme of 2014 was reformation and politics. This is an historic reference, a really long-term reference in those two words, if you didn't quite get that. So just some of these words, they don't mean much to people if you're not putting any meaning on them. But they are meaningful and they need to be understood. Otherwise, you don't know what's up. You don't really see what's up. But here, let me go on and finish reading this. In front of the town hall is a big globe. It is placed where the whole world is in red color. The color, it's the color of Reformation and Revolution. Did you know that? So you see this on heraldry, the flags. This is what they're telling you they're coming with. But we don't know from who. We don't know from whose perspective. But the entire globe, when you get the picture, all the land masses are red, and the oceans are depicted in silver, chrome, shiny chrome. Why would it be red? They're telling you that the color of Reformation and Revolution is red. Revolution, folks, as I've told you before, it's be careful. You think it's like the uprising that causes the new normal, the new way of life. No, revolution is coming back around. It's like on a wheel, the wheel of history, coming around and around. I've told you, break that wheel. Here they talk about it again. Reformation and Revolution, reconstructing the old, comes back around today, 500 years later, in this political, economic, non-religious, powerful organization called, sitting in the Vatican, having many different statuses, names, Vatican, the Holy See, through the leader called the Pope. They have an internal schism. I am beginning to believe that was a plan, and this is you got to think, if you think about it that way, you realize how long-term these people work. 500 years to have this happen, to bring it back in time together when the fruition of a global order is on us. And the technology has come at that time. And it was in this Jubilee. There's a lot of connections here that are interesting. I'm not here to really analyze all that, more to point it out. You all that have any sense of context in the world have to understand this and why I even talk about it. It's not for the sake of even analyzing. Well, it's just a system. It's a systemic organization that needs to be understood. Otherwise, you don't see it operating in your life everywhere. One of the many that might be operating. The rumors say that Pope Francis will come to Wittenberg during this celebration. Why would Pope visit Wittenberg, the start and center of Reformation, where Martin Luther in 517 put up the 95 Theses? The highest representative of German Protestantism, Nicholas Schneider, chairman of the Council of Evangelical Church in Germany, met personally with Pope Francis to invite him to the anniversary. During this meeting, the Pope underlined how important it was for him to be as churches walk together on the path to testifying the faith of this world. You notice that's how generic that statement is. Schneider said that the conversation with the Pope in the Vatican contributed to build trust. This is the main thing here for organizations is trust. This is the way money flies. Everything works on trusts or the establishments of trusts, whether legal or natural. And I'm not talking about nature's trust. That's a problem underneath this whole thing. Francis has not yet made a decision. This article was before. He has now made the decision. This is a big deal. This is about unifying the churches. This is about getting the church back together to have one face, but more than that, to include more churches together. I've talked about all this in the past. I usually don't organize it up so that I can go tell you by episode, but it's back there. You have it. If you've listened to me, you have it all. You have a lot of the background. Hopefully you went and you did some research to prove all this out to me. To you. And to me, I was going to say, and you haven't sent me any emails to say that I got something wrong when I was preparing this. We're here today, so I couldn't have been that off. What little bit may have been off was incidental because we're here now. So I'm here to show you how big a deal this thing is with this red earth. And I want to, just a aside, remember, this evangelical word popped up right here was the same thing that Pence was promoting. Remember we talked about that? So we have a problem, and what we have in the Republican Party is red as their color. I'm not going to make much a tie. I'm just making a coincidental issue here to look at. And we now point in that broadcast, I talked to you about this connection inside and the attack to Bannon, and who was doing it was the accessories to the Pope. And then who was doing it inside of that was the Jesuits now. Well, don't forget the power in the world that wants to extirpate everybody who is not unified with the faith. And so here's another layer of the military side, which we saw, like there's a military order in Malta. Now apparently it's supposed to be doing humanitarian aid for the kids or something. They hide all this stuff right in your face. We all think it's on the surface, everyone's doing cool. But it's all a plan. It's a long-term plan. I'm just amazed at how even though everyone dies before they're 80, for the most part, this thing goes on and on and on. This is a systemic organizational power. And it's with a bunch of people that believe in what they believe. And these are the most organized people in the world to pull this off. And what you may not understand is what they're pulling off. The methods, how they pull it off, are what affect you and cause your hardship right today, where you live. Whether or not they put the label on it that it comes from where it comes from, the method is what's being implemented. So you don't even identify it. Then you don't even identify that it's a harm to you. And then a lot of us give it all up to say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. That's where they want it to be. That's exactly how they want it to work. So this is how important this was. I don't know if you follow state, issues of state, matters of state. It's a big deal to emit cash or stamps and all this other paper. These are the things of international law. Flags, all that stuff, diplomacy, for as little as we see nowadays. Or at least seemingly so. Breaking Vatican to issue stamp featuring Martin Luther. This was a big deal here, whether or not anybody picked it up. if you happen to receive a piece of mail from the Vatican this year, don't be surprised to see the face of Martin Luther. This is the guy that supposedly braved this schism that broke up this place, made a big old mess of everything for 500 years, and someone's been working real diligently for that time to pull it back together. And this happened, so they put a stamp. Martin Luther gets a stamp. You know, I've always said, I've told you behind the woodshed, they put your face on money when they want to honor you for something. Well, this has a double twist. They want to honor the Lutherans to consider them to be coming in to rejoin, and the Protestants and the Presbyterians, and they needed to do that to show you make a stamp and you put notoriety on it. That's a big deal. But I looked at it and said, well, if this was a plan and this was a setup, they're just honoring the one who allowed it to be fulfilled in 500 years. That's pretty interesting. That's an awesome insight for all that. It was important enough that the Vatican produced a stamp. They even have the Vatican. If you think this is small potatoes, they have their own philatelic and numismatic office. In other words, they do stamps and money. And so this is not you don't disregard this power, this little bitty state in the world. You don't disregard it. It has force and effect. And you know that by looking around. What you may not know is all its connections, its tendrils, the octopus that it is, the monster, the tentacled monster that it is. And for me, the response has nothing to do, although the Catholic belief system can be shown to be faulty. That's not my attack. My attack is that this system is evangelizing the methods that destroy us. That I've shown and explained do destroy us. That the lawsuit that we filed when none of these people answered, not the Pope, but the Bar Association and the organizational structure of a state, some representatives within it, would not answer the charge that these are the methods they use to destroy people. So that's a default, folks. And so what are you going to do with that? Here, just told you a big secret, just told you the truth, just told you their own confession against them. And here we're down 4 years down the road, and I hear crickets even against that foundation. It doesn't bode well for us. But these people are in it for. They're serious about it. They have their own stamp and money office, and so they issued a stamp. This is a big deal. They honored somebody. It had a twofold reason why they did it. They're trying to maintain the. They've had the Lutherans and Protestants back in. I think they've been subverted as well. As far as I'm not talking about the belief, I'm talking about the political structuring. Because remember, they said Reformation and politics. Okay, so this has nothing to do with your belief system, right, wrong, or indifferent. It has to do with an organization that uses these different aspects of sovereignty in order to take or gain control. So let's go to what the Vatican itself says about this Reformation matter. The title for this you'll find, and this is from the Vatican itself, From Conflict to Communion, Lutheran Catholic Common Commemoration of the Reformation of 2017, Report of the Lutheran Roman Catholic Commission for Unity, 2013. And I go down to chapter 1, commemorating the Reformation in an ecumenical and global age. Global age. If that didn't pique your interest, why would they be speaking from a religious matter? That if you look at the way at least the Bible seems to speak, it's already said and done. It's a matter of who you choose, what direction you go. And salvation is nigh, given the return, and through your intercession is through Jesus Christ, and not some pope. That should be it. There is no global age. But see, we see the reflection of what they speak to. They understand the global age. They understand that they're the promoter of it, this so-called church. They are instrumental within it. If I hadn't seen this before, and this is 2013, this actually would have directed me to what I told you again. Now, let me just read the very first paragraph. Ecumenical and global age. Every commemoration has its own context. Today, the context includes three main challenges, which present both opportunities and obligations. And you got to understand that the international concepting of this and how things work. Apply these things to yourself as well. If you work in this idea that I try to tell you to do, you'll see the principles being worked all the time by these people. They're not wishy-washy. They may throw out stuff for you to accept that's wishy-washy, but they're not wishy-washy. So they know that when you go out in the world and you try to do something, you have opportunities, but you also have obligations. You're not alone, and you've got to do certain things. Those obligations may be, if you're in advancing your agenda, to make sure that your agenda is not really found out. It has nothing to do with the working together. At any rate, move one. It is the first commemoration. This commemoration that's going to happen here. Now we find out not yesterday, but it's going to happen in the future here, very soon. It is the first commemoration to take place during the Ecumenical age. And I emphasize these because they have a particular and interesting, they have absences and they have particular meanings that were actually created. So the Ecumenical age. Therefore, the common commemoration is an occasion to deepen communion between Catholics and Lutherans. This is speaking to the reunity and the treaty that's been signed or going to be commemorated here just next month. It is the first commemoration in the age of globalization. Did you ever notice in the biblical structure of what these people would be thinking as their guidance? Did you ever hear about the age of globalization? Well, the Catholic Church recognizes it. The Vatican recognizes it. Where have we heard globalization? As I said, if I had this document when I was doing the other research, it would have ended, that sentence right there ends it for y'all. To understand how powerful this thing is moving right on through into your life, right where you live. It's the age of globalization. This has been a plan. This has been moving forward all this time. And some other tabs I'll get to, you'll hear that. And I'm only bringing that to bring context, so it's just not a drop. All of a sudden, it just didn't show up. This has been working this entire time. 500 years worth of so-called reformation. I still think it was a psyop. I think it was made to be as a greater tool. It allows for different types of things to be dealt with. Therefore, the common commemoration must incorporate the experiences and perspectives of Christians from south and north, east and west. Folks, if you're on a globe with all those red territories, what is not spoken of when they talk about south and north, east and west? Well, the answer is nothing. These people are complete in their objective. It is the first commemoration that must deal with the necessity of a new evangelization in a time marked by both the proliferation of new religious movements and at the same time the growth of secularization in many places. Therefore, the common commemoration has the opportunity and obligation to be a common witness of faith. And this line speaks to the completeness of everyone in union, communion, in unity across faiths. This is the one world church actually being stated in an age of globalization, one world government. The territories of which are the color red. They talk about Reformation and they talk about the bringing to the consolidation. That's also the color of your blood, folks. Don't forget that. So here we have their own statement from the Vatican referencing ecumenical age and the age of globalization. Where is that in the Bible? And so we look at what's ecumenical to get a context. It itself means worldwide, of general in extent, influence, or application. These people are serious about what they're doing, and they don't mess around. I just tell you, over 500 years to be consistent is someone you don't want to underestimate. Of or relating to or representing the whole of a body of churches is ecumenical. promoting or tending toward worldwide Christian unity or cooperation is the word ecumenical. So this is the unity age in an age of globalization. Well, let's look at what's globalization. Just use them quickly, folks. I don't have time to burrow in. You've heard me talk about it. I don't get too deep in some of this. I expect you need to research your stuff. If I tell you too much, you think you know it all, and then you maybe do nothing. You just take my word for it, or you say, okay, I agree with that, or I can see that. And next, I go play another game. I'll go watch another sports event. I'll go do something else instead of what I ought to be doing. Globalization is a term. It's not a word. It's a term. Go look up that distinction for you folks. Those of you taking notes. I guess I'm really only speaking ever to the ones that are taking notes. I'm certainly not speaking to anybody who doesn't sit through this and take notes and move on and actually start to apply it. This is a term which may be used broadly to mean doing things as distant people do them, or more narrowly to mean complying to global standards in economy, politics, culture, education, environment, or other matters. You always pay attention to the nondescript other matters. Did you hear all the things? We did not talking. The Vatican is not involved with religion for the sake of a belief system. It's involved in economy, politics, culture, social justice warriorship, culture, the non-culture, culture, education. They're into educating y'all. They have been for hundreds of years now. Environment. What is this entire thing coming down on us now with carbon tax and climate change and everything else involved but that? And other matters. Things they're not going to tell you about. You're going to have to figure them out on your own. Kind of like I've done on some things. What are these other matters? You see this in United States law as well. They'll talk about a certain law and for other purposes. Now, that's a little more constrained because you look within the context of the act itself to find what the other purposes could be. And a lot of times they're silently explaining that there's more things underneath that are the supportive foundation. In the case of grants, it would be the other purposes would be to advance the obligations and duties of the Congress relative to the United States of America and the enabling acts of the Western states to dispose the land to private holding. The other purposes is to fulfill that. They don't state that in the act. And so here's another purposes, a definition of globalization. We don't know the extent, and we don't know from the foundation or the purpose of the people imposing it, but the Vatican is dealing through this age of globalization, which deals in economy, politics, culture, education, environment, or other matters. Did you hear about Jesus Christ? Did you even hear about the Madonna? No, you don't hear none of that. You didn't see advancing the faith. Well, that might be under other matters, but it's going to be in context of that organization, isn't it? And so they're not just attaching other matters by itself. They're attaching to this entirety. The Vatican's involved with the entirety of these subject matters. And now go to the UN and go into what they do, housing security, food security, not national security. They can care less about that. They don't want you to have a nation. They go into this security and that security. Because I don't get much of a list. But every security that you see, every legislation comes with security is a globalization act which touches in every one of these subject matters and for other purposes. Globalization is a term. It describes the way countries and people of the world interact and integrate. Many things have become globalized as people come into contact. Now, you're looking at a virus there, folks. You should be the virus, the wayfarer, putting the back into play your non-dependent view, so you're not integrated, because integration doesn't make for private property, does it? You see right here the underlying problem. Just contacting people in the world, and I'm telling you, it's those people that are globalized will infect you. And they know that. So they mention economic globalization, political globalization, cultural globalization. You can go and read it. My point to tell you, the term globalization means global standards. You in your nations do not have a standard anymore in face of this, and that's a one world governance, global control that the Vatican agrees with. As I told you last year, the run-up about how big and bad this was going to be coming, how we tied it all together, how the Pope was embracing Agenda 2030, how he then would also agree with the migration principle that you're seeing destroying all these countries. He would agree with the debt principle built in for everyone on an austerity or equal level. Your prosperity is deemed to be equal austerity. The Pope and that organization agrees, in fact, promotes all of this. It's not just a religious, as you might consider, religious organization. And I want people to really understand that part. As I said, I probably could care less about this organization, given it was strictly to have a belief system. It's how I actually divide out people who have a Jewish faith, who have a belief system. Their belief system I have no problem with if they keep it to themselves. You turn it around and use it as cover for Zionism. Now I have a political side. I have a problem with that. They come beating down on me with that cover of religious protection. This is no different than the Vatican does, but on a more identifiable basis. It's how I can look at it then. I would have never thought of this myself. I'm too naive in the world, folks. I believe what I was told. Until the day that something stopped making sense in such a great way it caught my attention. For as much as I didn't like the day to be faced down by 5 cops with 5 guns going to shoot me dead, at the time this all starts to roll out where you're going to be shot dead, apparently I needed to see. That's what caught my attention. I don't know about woke me up. Caught my attention. It took that much, I guess. And luckily, metered enough that I'm here today. I survived. Some guy 6 months later than me didn't survive. He's dead. And I took note of that too. But I started to realize regarding America, well, where'd it go? It's not what I was told this is supposed to be. I needed apparently that shock. So I'm grateful to that shock. I'm not necessarily so grateful for what I found regarding the investigation of where America went and where we are today. And you do the background study on the international side of this and look at the documents and find them, and you realize that the world is a whole lot more integrated than you might think already, way before this promotion of globalization and its policies through the UN. The ecumenical age, I didn't even know what the heck they were really talking about here, folks. I don't get too deep into a lot of this side on this, but what was ecumenical but worldwide? And what they talk about is communion, union, unity, and sure enough, looking at the UCC.org, this is the United Church of Christ. God has moved throughout the 20th century to impel a worldwide movement toward Christian unity, of which the United Church of Christ is but a part. Understood deeply as obedience, the movement is seen more expediently as an antidote to the rising forces of paganism. The ecumenical movement calls the churches to restore their oneness in Christ by union. A divided church is unlikely to convince the world. And it goes on in talking. I wanted to focus on this Christian unity thing. Forget the Christian part. Forget the belief system part. Look at the method, the outcome, and the organizational structure. They want unity. This is going to be, I've told you, this is the consistent message across the board. Wherever this globalization touches, it wants to make everybody unified, and that is what we can also call the process, ultimate outcome of what is consensus. It's also collaboration. It's partnerships. It's stakeholder threats that sit there until they get unified answer to the outcome they want. That's the crime I told you. These were all felonies where there's property rights. Because the people that are doing this under a deception without the actual authority to do it. But this United Church of Christ has stated that they are one of the helpers and promoters of this movement that's been working for a long time. Their logo has on it the motto that they may all be one. Pretty innocuous sounding. It's got a cross with a crown on top. How many crowns are you going to get in the world? But one. And so my thought went to, okay, who's running behind this? They make it sound they put a nice face on this thing, but they're talking about this unity problem. Who else talks about unity? The United Church of Christ, called UCC, interestingly, is a mainline Protestant Christian denomination. The historical confessional roots in the Reformed, Congregational, and Evangelical Protestant traditions, and with all the 5,000 churches and nearly 1 million members. The United Church of Christ is historically a continuation of the General Council of Congregations Christian Churches, founded under the influence of the New England Puritanism, the Evangelical and the Reformed Church, and the General Council of the Congregation of Christian Churches, united in 1957, if you thought this was happening this year. And this is from before it's got together to become that. Won't read on and on. I guess there's a whole lot to look at inside here. You can pick up the link on the blogcaster. Point is, it's existent. The point is, it's pushing unity. It's the union. Come union. It's what's going on under the color of the authority of what they would tell you is Jesus Christ. When you look closer, it's not. And it's trying to make the formation of all religions, however they can make them fit, to be a united your religion and a one world church. Getting agreement. They don't have to be all formed up. They just have to get agreement. And there's only going to be one head of that. So I went to the look and I said, well, we got this thing about the extirpation of everyone who don't follow the Christian religion regarding the Catholic religion. And we have that little statement in the oath of a Jesuit. And so here it is, the union. They were always into unity and keeping one power. And they were the military for that Catholic religion. And we have talked about the governor of that and everything else before in the broadcast. Don't forget that part. So I'm looking at this unity movement that's been going on for quite a few decades, at least, in organization, built from other organizations before it. And I wanted to see who is the staff of, they call the United Church of Christ in La Mesa. Now, all these places have these different logos, but they all use the same United Church of Christ. And so I'm looking just for the correlation between Church of Christ and seeing who runs these things and any kind of coincidences. And sure enough, we find the one in La Mesa is a Reverend Paula J. Elizabeth, is a United Church of Christ ordained minister, specializing in transitional and intentional interim ministry. She also is a spiritual director, these are capital S, capital D, with over 20 years experience having been taught in a Jesuit tradition of inclusivity and openness. Bare your souls, folks. So, there's a connection. So I'm going to go back to that, what is that statement that they said there in their logo, that they may all be one. So I'm looking down and just tracking that back. What are the Jesuit influences in these organizations that don't really show one on the outside? And I found that phrase used in a Jesuit, and again, a Jesuit prayer.org organization. And they essentially speak, the Jesuits speak, whatever that will be. And they reference this biblical authority that they are moving through, or the St. Justinian Martyr, JN 17, 2017, and they have this phrase in there as well. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. And I go on and on, read it, they have repeat it twice. It's in John, I think 17, 20, 26 is what the JN is. This is now picked up out of the Bible, used as a Jesuit motto for coincidence. And so the unity that shall extirpate every opposition coming from the Jesuits is running theme in all of this as we go back to show that the Vatican in 2013 recognizes an age of globalization, which is including not just a religious belief system. It's incorporating everything in your life. They got their fingers in every bit of it. And it's with the object to unify. Again, what globalism does, and integrate. There is no non-dependent, there's no separation in this plan at all. And it's not the only one, and I think parts of these are just different ways of approaching this plan to unify the world. Beyond my real comprehension that they're doing it, but I'm watching and reading about how they have been doing it and see the fruition of it today to the point that I can identify the beast, the many tentacled beast, and find out it's living in a place near me. So how is it that these things happen invisibly? I find another article that the United States of America, wants to be this big sovereign and big independent. When you read the international documents, you might have another thought. And you can put the value and the weight of what I'm saying as you will. You will have to make these decisions on what their relevance is and their importance. I've now figured over years now that they have a lot of relevance. Why I'm even bringing it up today. Because it becomes one of those other things that we have quite a few different angles on who's pulling the strings, maybe and for why, and maybe even without proof that they may actually be connected at some level. Or it could be rationalized that they could be, and without proof to the contrary, given the results, we would have to hold them highly in the probability category. That found another issue here, the Catholic roots of Obama's activism. A very interesting article from the New York Times that shows and discusses Obama, shows Ronald Reagan, goes on through and talks about all these issues of these leaders, supposed leaders of the United States, supposed to be beholding to we the people, so-called, are being guided and led and influenced. And this is the main thing for the unity, is being influenced to move and to cause union. There's not much separation between the Catholic Church and its influence on leaders as well, as we can see in the White House right now, and the literal Jesuit implantation. Remember, the Pope now is a Jesuit too, all at the same time. And this becomes a potential problem here. It just happened yesterday about a notice that came out within the point itself, that they sing the high praises to Obama as someone who absorbs. He didn't really agree. He wasn't a Catholic. You don't say that he did. He wasn't baptized, but that he took on and so-called evangelized the Catholic faith by what he did in his so-called community development. Obama did, the unqualified one. They also mention here in this article who he was guided by, and who made a comment about him. One of the first days in the job, Mr. Obama heard Cardinal Bernardin speak of an economic development meeting. What's this cardinal speaking in economic development? As I told you, they got their hands everywhere. It's not just their riches and their banks. I mean, these people are in the game. They're they're of the world, folks, as I could say it that way. So he's Obama's listening to this cardinal speak of economic development. Economic development, as we understand now, is commerce, the promotion of commerce. It's not. I can't say it's the antithesis. It negates production. Production comes from your property rights. Commerce is a derivative from that. And so they deal in a very particular place. And so what I've been trying to show to you, you need to identify yourself in a place prior to where they put themselves. But this cardinal speaking on economic development, Obama's right there. He felt a Catholic novice there. He wrote in his memoir and later decided not to ask about what the catechism was, but he was a quick study. He had the power to do an analysis, power analysis, He had to do a power analysis of each Catholic church, said one of his mentors in the time, Gregory Caluzzo, a former Jesuit priest and disciple of the organizer Saul Alinsky. Mr. Obama, Mr. Galuzzo said, soon understood the chain of command and who had influence in individual parishes. Won't read more there. You can read more. It's pretty fascinating what they expose here with Obama and then he goes in to become the president and the influence there for all the pictures we see of the other influences That one I don't know that came to the public's awareness too much. But there is the influence, and running the Catholic doctrine, his agreement to it, they say here, Mr. Obama effectively proselytized for the church in its role in improving the community. The community. This is the main thing that the globalization is after, forming a community. It's not your government. It's not your way of life. It's their community. Now, protect and serve the community is not protecting and serving you, as we started seeing the first cracks in the pores of that porcelain. As Obama even, as he opened meetings in the backs of churches with Lord's Prayer and showed a comfort with faith that put the people he hoped to organize at ease. So now we see he's a deceiver as well. To get people to agree with him, he'll take on the air to get that to fulfill his agenda. So all these people are the same type of people. Found interesting here as well what Obama doesn't do with the Catholic Church is inspired by someone who does something else. In a particular way. As Mr. Obama helped expand the program from Catholic parishes to megachurches and Protestant congregations, he felt that the need slaked by the prevailing black liberation theology inspired by the civil rights movement and preached by African American ministers like Mr. Wright of Trinity. And what I find interesting is that they just truncated it there. The notion that Jesus delivered salvation to communities that expressed faith through good deeds suited Mr. Obama's instincts and perhaps his interests. So, what did I make a highlight here for about they truncated the Trinity? What do you think is the term that they kind of held back, or the identification of what they held back there? They talked about the Trinity was the United Church of Christ. Reflection of the Trinity. As we see that, again, this is why I think why I was even here when I was doing my research and finding out where are these connections to this United Church of Christ. Here it pops up again. It happened to be with Reverend Wright in his church. What is the connection there? But that the Jesuit influence on guiding Obama through understanding the command structure. So this goes into when he becomes president and continues partly why you see this community focus, community building, and what it is actually building what the Vatican is interested in on a global scale in this age of globalism, the age of the ecumenicism, the unity of everything into one faith, essentially. And so what happens here coming up is 500th Reformation anniversary will be ecumenical and include Pope Francis. Well, ecumenical is the union, the making whole, the whole world. Right? So this 500th Reformation anniversary was also based in this treaty that's come up to reform the schism made by Martin Luther. And it's been advanced by the United Church of Christ, which we see has its roots in guidance in the Jesuits, which are oath-bound to extirpate all opposition to the church by any means needed, by any means. In other words, they can lie to you. In fact, we understood that within the Catholic religion and the organizational structure, the general can speak contrary to the Pope if it advances the cause of the organization. The 500th anniversary of the Christian Reformation in 2017 is to be profoundly ecumenical, with Pope Francis even taking part in the celebratory service with Lutherans in Sweden in October of this year was a report. The Pope actually did make the decision to go, and this is a big deal for this whole thing called the World Council of Churches is involved, evangelical churches. This is a world gathering thing for all churches at some level. Again, there's also, you won't find, this is, the background is working to unify, the front ground is just attempting to put this thing back together. But it is worldwide in its scope, even though it's only happening in Sweden. He's not, the leader here of the organization is not showing up for no good reason. He hadn't showed up before. So this is the culmination that's happening to advance and bring about, I think, good people in honestly believing religious beliefs to essentially just put the ring in everybody's nose underneath the guise that things are needing to go that way, and that they will give up whatever independent thought they had, let alone try to analyze their thoughts, their religious belief itself, for a lot of errors, if nothing else. What we actually call heresies. But that's notwithstanding that organization, it's got a cover that it wants you to believe. So this 500th Reformation is going to happen on a day. Didn't happen yesterday on the 23rd, so when is it going to happen? And none other than October 31st. So that's, for the United States, that's Halloween, All Hallows Eve. Now, All Saints Eve should tell you the origins of that date for the Catholic purposes. However, it also has to do with a pagan religion. Samhain, I think, as it's called, and the Catholic imposition was done in the 1700s, if I remember right. I'm not reading through this; I'm just looking at the tab to move on because I'm slowing up a little bit. But we see now, as I said, Obama just did what he had to say with the Catholics to get community building, which is actually what the Pope wants anyway. We want these all-included, integrated communities, not your towns, not your wealth, not your watersheds, not your production. We want you all in an economically controlled austerity. In the age of globalization, Obama was doing the same technique that they're doing right now to the Lutherans and the Protestants, and they do this celebration on Halloween. That was in 1700 was to overdo what the pagan religion was, to make it more accessible, more acceptable, so they can say, oh, we're all doing this all as one. We all believe the same. And so join us, or at least don't fight us as we work through 500 years to convince you to work with us even more closely. So this is I guess the fulfillment of the plan to this part, and to see it roll out and come to fruition, I think, and why I've spent so much time here today, to kind of tie that together for you. It certainly means more study for you, if you're interested, to see a power in the world that is putting on you the hardships that you find around you. And this is everyone, whether you recognize it or not. These are all the same terms, all the same language, fabricated ages in order to make it sound important, give it the cloth of authority that you're going to, we're in something grand, and we have to fulfill that in them. But that's another, again, maybe you don't have a self-worth and responsibility to yourself, but that's just to make people think that they're doing something great, and they forgot about the greatness they were supposed to be for themselves and around them. It's controlled globally, though, and I hope you see that. You see these concepts are coming down and coming through to affect you in your life by the people that are around you that make decisions that you have to go respond to. And let me just come back to the beginning, or a little bit, almost went off completely off track. The property owners that are being attacked by the county for what ostensibly, when you find on Track and Back, are international codes, and the county's trying to steal their property. The county has some kind of thing, the taxes alone are all a problem. But no one understands how to look at that and what the scam was. And they don't understand who's making the decisions. And the decisions are made by an extended agent of this Vatican organization. by the agent representative of the Vatican organization that represents that, as well as its action within governments. Remember, we focus on the Bar Association now. There's an international bar association. There's all kinds of bar associations. They all end up being tied to the same place. We heard in their own House resolutions that they support sustainable development and the things of globalization, all this, where appropriate. Where isn't appropriate when they've got you all, you don't figure out what's going on. As long as they get away with it, that's appropriate. When you didn't throw off the occupation that they did in the government, United States government around 1953, it's appropriate. It's appropriate until you say it's not. That's the definition, folks. You do it until it's not. As long as you stay crickets, they are getting ahead. And they are going to force on you slowly, and you will die over time. Those that come after you, they're going to force this entire system on you the way it needs to be to promote all the things in the list of what globalization is, which entails what? Economy, politics, culture, education, environment, and other matters, which you have to find out about, and I don't know if we'll ever know that total list. Is that list good? I mean, is that enough? Oh, do you think they got you when they got those things covered for you? Do you think they got you under control? Do you think you have a chance? You think your old utopian ideas and screaming and yelling at each other in chat rooms or whatever, or in emails or in videos, you think it's affecting this 500-year execution? And it ain't over. It's like the beginning. So to me, the 23rd, they're telling us the 23rd, was the beginning, this is the beginning of a fulfillment. It's the end. It's beginning of the end for anybody who considers being non-dependent, becoming separate, being able to have property. This is the fruition of that point. They're about had it. They about got it done, and they've got a whole bunch of millions more people that are going to be proselytizing that point. And yes, my tongue didn't work, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. Fix it. Now, so this is not coming without a bit of problem. On the day that there was that they agreed that we saw last year that the big deal was happening was the 23rd. I found only one response of what was going on with the Pope, and this was it. The Pope risks traditionalists' anger with Martin Luther commemoration. Rising the ire of Catholic traditionalists, Pope Francis is to take part in a joint Catholic-Lutheran service in Sweden in October, marking in Halloween and Samhain, for all you pagans, in October, marking the start of the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's anti-Catholic Reformation. It's like celebrating the divorce and still living together. The service will take place in southern Swedish city of Lund on October 31st, the Vatican said. The Vatican admits this is happening. This is not just fake news. Lund is where the Lutheran World Federation was founded in 1947. This is like the conqueror coming into town and claiming the land. So we can go read more about it. We can talk about all the heretics that were made out of all this and how they're not now, how Luther is now the hero, how they had to do that to appease the Lutherans, but that there's a risk. And so what happens on the 23rd actually was not the risk of that unity. And remember, the Pope is Jesuit. He doesn't care how this thing comes together, as long as it comes together. He doesn't care if he's violating things. He doesn't care if he becomes a heretic, as the Martin Luther was a heretic and all those that followed, and now it's supposedly patched. And between them, I suppose it could be patched. But they're imposing this thing in the age of globalization, so it means you are involved. They didn't just keep it within their bounds. This is all, essentially, I see it as a plan. On the day, 62 scholars correct Pope Francis for propagating heresies. Seem to be a proof of the fact of how the Jesuits will extirpate by any means anyone who doesn't believe in the faith over time to bring unity into the world and run it of the world. Be in the world but not of it, and they are making the world of them. 62 scholars correct Pope Francis for propagating heresies. Was the only thing that came out the day I thought we were going to have some more celebration in a different area. I found that silence on the other side to be deafening in a way, but it forms the point about the Jesuit in the office and the overriding purpose to bring all religions together to form one world church. They're doing this also in the context that you may not understand. The one world church is globalization. It's all the economy, all the politics you see going on, it's all the environmental stuff that's going on, it's all of that is the church. Remember, the green religion is promoted by Gorbachev. And I've told you that when he came into the United States, he went to the San Francisco, he went to the Presidio, and he had a Presidio trust. The Congress gave him a Presidio trust to go over the public lands. And I haven't followed that back. I did a report on that years and years ago. And then he moved from the Presidio trust into New York, where that's the UN again, right? And the United States Congress gave over land for the UN. Why they did that, I don't even know. All I care, I've said it, you shove that building, you topple that building into the water, you put everybody on it that wants to do anything with the UN and or sustainable development and climate change and all this other globalization stuff, and you give them a paddle and you let them paddle back over the pond to Europe, and they can beach themselves there. Put it there. But no. Why did Congress put it here? I don't know. Well, I do know, but that's a different point. Why did we bring a Soviet reformer transformation artist into the United States at that time, give him a trust over the land, a public land, and then move him and then he moves his organization over into New York, and they established the green religion, talking about environment, conservation, climate, all this stuff, climate change, all this stuff. This is the order you're watching. It doesn't look on the news. It doesn't look like a religious group doing this, but in fact it is. It's not religion either, and this is the problem. This is all a front, an affront too, as well. 62 scholars correct Pope Francis for propagating heresies. Well, this happens to be a very narrow area. Pretty interested that it came out on the day I was looking for something else, the signing and the celebration of a treaty, and then the celebration after in the party. I thought that's how they were talking about it 2 years ago and last year. But that's not how it turned out that day. Instead, some scholars, Catholic scholars, are saying we're making a filial correction for propagating heresies, Pope. Well, he hasn't been listening to them. But their narrow areas are simply really seem to be related to homosexuality, divorce, and accepting sacraments. And I couldn't quite tell in the quick reading. It seems like almost clergy that's married, and the distinction between having sexual relations with your wife, apparently, or maybe even your husband, and the fact that you hold a sacrament with Christ. And there's a problem with the denial of that ability to happen, I think, is the way I understood that. Again, not getting too specific. I'm not going to get lost in the minutia of all that, because what they're doing is they're acting outside of any religious context when they're embracing globalization, which affects every bit of your life. And it's in through and being pushed in through processes that you may or may not be aware of. If you've been listening to me, you've heard me talk about it. Again, focus in a narrow way, for simple terms, policy consensus, the whole arbitration, dispute resolution is what they call that, how that was brought in. All that's part of getting this thing in. International codes local to you, that's it. Whatever international code you have that's been adopted, that's it. They say the adoption was the consent, the ratification to impose what? The global standards. You hear it, folks, right there in the definition of globalism. You get an international standard, and you are underneath globalization. You are in the process. And they got that way through the methods I'm telling you about that you may not be aware of, and I wish more people took note of. Now, this global or historic predictable action, as I kind of do here in much more narrow areas, with the function of the application of this nonsense on our lives that we tend to accept. There's a way to look at it more prophetic, if I can say that, in belief systems that is viewed that way, that you can predict the future. Well, I found another article along these whole lines about the Reformation, that it was actually the healing up of maybe the healing of the wound. Remember, we got in the Bible, there's a reference of healing a wound. This looks a lot like it, folks. That's why I'm telling you there might be a bigger issue here. I haven't been given any insight other than to tell you that may be enough for some of you, that this sure looks like that, although I've not been inspired to say it is. I just don't know anymore. It's just like I'm not that well versed, and no real bright light has been given to me. I'm just putting stuff together that makes sense in the context of all that I can see. That this looks very, very, very important in a historic powers and dominions thing, principalities and powers area. Someone called Ellen White prophesied that the Vatican will destroy Protestantism and Pope Francis will succeed. Was an interesting report I found looking at this condition. And the Roman Catholic Church, I'll read it, the Roman Catholic Church is far-reaching in her plans and modes of operation. She is employing every device to extend her influence and increase her power in preparation of a fierce and determined conflict to regain control of the world, to reestablish persecution, and to undo all that Protestantism, I'll get this right, has done, as written in the Great Controversy, page 565, 566. This was stated before, and it doesn't need to be such a prophetic view if you look at the history of what was going on. By or whenever this book was written, I don't see the date, the international documents were in place to show all of this. The so-called prophecy that this would be happening, and it's happening today, folks. This is the point. Cashless societies is another thing that's happening. They're running into problems, but that doesn't mean those aren't going to be solved. Here, it was, and I forgot to go look the date of the Great Controversy book. But she stated all this. Whoever shall believe and obey the word of God will thereby incur reproach and persecution was another statement, showing that this system, that this so-called religion, isn't that at all. And so there was an insight, and I can't remember, I wish I could, my mind's not finding out where Ellen White, which group she was with. I think it was a Seventh-day Adventist, and so anyway, it's another view of how to work, and the Seventh-day Adventists have a couple of very powerful points that I think need to be considered, and those points are what happened to be what the church adulterated, the Catholic Church adulterated, and so everyone has their view that will tell you things aren't quite what they seem, and there are serious heresies in about all of it. That I turn to focus on the fact that whatever they are, they're getting this globalization to work. Nobody's stopping it. There isn't any reason why it shouldn't be stopped. To my experience now, I see it can be stopped. What it takes is recognizing the truth in these statements made by people. Don't look at what you're told they are, these people that give you the truth, like you get defamed essentially because of your system, your belief system. It's just an opinion, but when these opinions become the proof of their statement, you better start making them important. To me, that if you call it a prophecy, to me, looking at the international documents, it's not a prophecy; it's a plan. You can see it coming. That's how I can tell you behind the woodshed what I tell you. Now I found out Ellen White was saying it in a book a while back. Different way, but same thing. They were going to destroy the Protestants. Well, if you see it as a plan, well, yeah, that could be predicted as well. When you see the Jesuits working to unify the church on a worldwide basis, one world religion. We talked about the United Nations promoting all religions in one flag. You're watching the thing happen in your face right there. You're watching these systems that is the thing of globalization, globalizing, bringing everything into a standard. They use the word culture. Do you think that might mean your religion too? Everything has a standard. Slowly come on to the point. You don't even see it. It's right here, but these are big deals happening. I think it's such a big deal. I've spent way a lot longer than I was going to think about always about trying to tease it out. This is not really an opinion from me. I see the cause, the effect, the plan. It's written down. It's in effect. It's executed. It has connections all through this thing. And it's not just that it's, again, the religion. It's that these methods, these things are long-term, and they do cause change. And it's not the type of change you necessarily want. And I see that change in the country, the United States of America, particularly because of its property laws. I don't know that I could see it if it wasn't for that. So in that regard, United States of America, in that regard, was a shining beacon. But the shining beacon has been allowed to be tarnished by the people. And so it's not so easy to see in this fog that's been thrown up in our faces. Ellen White, apparently, by her discussion, there's more to say. I could talk more and more. I could read all this. It really is fascinating. I'd like to jump in, but it would take way too long to discuss it. I think if you read it on your own, just notice what's going on. Notice people have seen it. Notice that it is going on. It is brought together. That means something, that they are focused on globalism. It's not just this thing like sustainable development. It's not just this question. No, the bar knew it was something. They called it sustainable development on the Europe side. They wouldn't say that on the American side. They wouldn't say it was Agenda 21 on the American side. They would only call it sustainable development. Your presidents brought that in. Whoa, I wonder why. Obama was influenced by the Jesuit and fortified a proselytizing of the religion without being baptized into it. And you see now Jesuits are sitting in the White House. You think there's a cause and effect here, folks? You think that the promotion of the wars now continuing and the making of wars, the rumors of wars, if you will, and the actual fighting without the declaration of wars isn't causing mass migration of people, which is fully following into what this Pope said last year he endorsed in Agenda 2030, which has that provision in it, to the profit of those countries, those organizations that those people migrate from and migrate to. In other words, there's a win-win situation for the systemic corruption and adultery this church is fostering and encouraging through its policies in the age of globalization. It agrees with it, folks. I don't know how to stress this enough. And I'm telling you on the other side, I've been talking to you on the functional side, how they enforce that is through all these other things I talked to you about with policies, not law, judiciaries that are reflexive and not in law, that have opinions where they shouldn't have opinions, legislatures that don't listen to their obligations and duties. You see, the church listens to its obligations and duties, but these legislators won't. They're to the property. They want to destroy property. And how they bring in stakeholder systems through policy consensus to defeat you at every turn, and they do it because the system they set up does it. When someone puts in an input, it wins. If you're not there to counter it, you lose. If you're there to counter it, it's a 50-50 shot depending on how much you understand the system. So it's meant that you will likely lose, unless you start organizing up, and I don't say unify, don't be unity. You work, you find the wrong you need to make right. You go work there, and then along the path, find people that agree with that for you. You'll find your own natural group. It's a unification, but by purpose, to throw off the occupier, to throw out the insanity, to throw off the globalization, which has actually got a source of support from a so-called religious group. And how are they doing that? I talked to you here last week. It's bringing it on. This I talked about just a moment ago, cashless society. Why would they be doing that? It's been predicted it's coming. How are they going to pull it together? I could never figure that out. And then Bitcoin pops up. Oh, that's a cool trick. And I talked to you about De-Dollarization a few weeks ago. Another article here. The world is creeping toward De-Dollarization. Well, the global standard has to be part of a control grid, doesn't it? So they got to keep track of everybody. It seems awesome how they would do that. But they're going to, again, IBM was kind of showed us how they do that when they teamed up with Germany. So now you see there's no separation between what we're told was Hitler and who was working with Hitler and who was fostering, encouraging what they were, and then the outcome of that ends up being Israel, who happens to be the same agents that the Catholic Church went to charge you all usury where the church itself could not. And their belief system, the Jewish belief system, doesn't have a problem with that. Yet the Catholic religious system says the Jews pursuant to the Bible are Satan's children. Now, anybody who has a Jewish belief, a Jewish faith belief, I'm not into all that. What are you doing on the political side? I do have a problem with, because this all ends up being politically driven as well, and that's what Zionism is. So you're using the cover of a Jewish faith, no different than Catholicism uses the cover of Catholic faith, supposedly honoring Jesus Christ in a proper way, to use it to cover for globalization, which has nothing to do with any belief system, right, wrong, or indifferent. But the world is creeping toward de-dollarization. More people are starting to see it. This is from the Mises site they're representing this fact of this whole de-dollarization transferring system. What I was talking about with everybody's involved, all the nation states, all the nations are involved. No matter how you look at it, I've told you they're all interlocked through whatever system they use. They're all interlocked to the globalized system. There will be no escape. And you're told that too. There is no escape from this system. And that said, and I don't want to, I'll just say it this. That said, once you have enough reading in legal and realize these terms they use and the words counter to those and the jurisdictional things, you look very carefully at the passage that says you really won't escape. You don't have the number of the beast, and it says, but it also says unless you have the number of his name. But when you have someone's number, you understand him. And if you have his number, you may understand him enough to avoid it. And so to me, I saw that as a little bit of a hope. And how do you do that? You have to make yourself non-dependent on this entire system and bring your responsibility to you and then those around you. And work with those that are not integrated. They say the whole purpose is to integrate. Don't interact with that system or integrate with the system, they say, is globalization. They're telling you what not to do here, I guess is the other thing. I guess I missed that point. When you read these definitions, they're saying, I'm telling you, when you see a definition that says that that's what they're doing, you have to understand what that is and then not do that. But you have to not just not do that. People miss this as well. It's not just silence is consent. It's silence in doing nothing is consent. Even having a vociferous objection is consent. Even knowing not to integrate, but not taking now the secret, the steps to do something else to show you've not integrated. If you don't do that, you've lost. It's not so simple here. I keep telling you, it's multi-steps here. You have to do things. It's not just to say, I won't integrate and I won't do this and won't do that. You have to do something counter. You don't say, I'm not that person. You have to say, I'm not that person. I'm this over here, not that over there, which you have jurisdiction of. I'm not that, I'm this. If you don't make a claim of something, and I don't mean just like free man on the land stuff, you have to have a status in international law. And that's where, again, this land law in the United States really comes to bear, because it then deals in relationships which are is stopped by their obligations and duties that you see the Vatican does know and recognize. You say, we heard it right out of their mouth, right out of their print. But this de-dollarization now is becoming more important. Another article is made going through the questions about this all. They talk about it. This economics is also politically charged. So you're seeing the combining of the things of globalization into, they make it diffuse so you can't understand where it's at, but you're seeing that everything becomes unified. Everything is unified, integrated. All these separate concepts are integrated. And they're made in such a way that you may not understand how that's all been done. And I'm pausing. Because you don't know that, you don't know the terrain, I'm suggesting you need to take a step back and understand all this if you're going to really be serious about how this works. They're telling us how it's coming down. People are recognizing it is coming down. Those that may have been prophets before and have said it's coming, but I can tell you that I guess if I would have been thoughtful that way, I could have positioned myself as some prophet, maybe even for profit, if you now start understanding what words and terms can be messed around with. But that was never in me to do. I was just looking innocently at the thing. I was kind of coming after the fact. Well, this is not making sense. How do I make sense of it? And I found it's nonsense. That's no sense. Unless you understand it's tied to an execution of a plan. And it's not for you. So you got to take yourself out of it. You literally have to remove yourself from the whole thing and look really objectively about this. And at that point, I went back to I don't know what I don't know, so I got to put everything in possibilities and probabilities. This is not even up to have an opinion. So no opinion, beyond opinion. I mean, there's no way to have an opinion. You just have to watch almost after the fact, but you can predict as well, because they tell us. So with this globalization is coming the globalization of how you interact and integrate with that system, are forced to integrate with that system. And we've been talking about biometrics. This is all part of that. The Pope believes in this, okay? This is all part of it. You can't divorce, you can't even reform the divorce. You cannot separate this condition at all. What you're looking at in the world is a religious movement as well. Everything can be viewed through this act of globalization that is being given the stamp of approval of the Vatican through all of its tentacles. So I've just wanted to, so that can be used as the pervasive force in the world, the Jews of which are just one little tentacle. Why? Because they were used early on as a tool for the church itself to not do an overt heresy about charging usury, but took advantage of some other people that would and gave themselves the distance of a non-agency agency, which is still another heresy. And no one seems to stop this stuff. No one calls it out and says, well, that just makes you a criminal, and we're just gonna have to put you there and leave you there, and you're gonna be banned from the world. You're just not we're not gonna give you air wherever you pop up. But anyway, you go on Cashless Society, biometrics is all part of the globalization. We now have it. UK supermarket becomes world's first to offer cashless checkout with finger vein scan. And so we have all the problems with the digitalization, the hacking, the hackability, the databases, the privatization of this in people and organizations that I can tell you when you look at maybe Clint Richardson's Corporation Nation and all the integrated corporate structures and nesting of corporate structures and people that are in the same boards of direction, board of directors and things like that. Then you can envelop that to organizations themselves that have their own board directors involved with the economics of this and how they're going to keep you underneath control, how they're going to track you, how they're going to trace you, all that stuff. You're seeing it come out. This is not a joke. This is not some opinion. This is not some fantasy. This is not sci-fi. It's not just being done just for no reason either. And that's the thing I want people to see. There's a cause and effect behind all of this. Everything, everywhere. So, you're going to go and get finger vein scan. I'm not even going to touch whether that's viable or not. I'm actually going to do it. They have all kinds of problems with fingerprints when you get right down to the law, using it as evidence. So, I'm not going to touch all that. The point is they're going to cashless checkout and they don't need that chip. How's that? Another thing that this globalization uses as a tool, a weapon against us, to bring us in violation of the creation and focus on the creation instead of the creator. You have to understand what's going on here with climate change. Just to touch some news stories that just came up. Again, September 19th is the date, so we're just a couple days out. I want to say this is all timely stuff, I guess. I usually don't like doing the dates on the broadcast. I'm hoping my broadcasts are somewhat timeless in some regard. except for the tangibility to an action in the world, they're actually looking at universal ongoing principles, ongoing methodologies that are going to continue. These broadcasts will be relevant until you stop that system. And the writing on the wall is not very good for us in that regard. That said, I see that we have the ability to pull back and make a line in the sand, if you will, and make an island of distinction in the world to continue to be that example. Remember, we're just a small group of people in the United States, and smaller group of people yet as the property owners that understand the land, and the producers even less. They're not even now 1% of the population. Miners and timber people and farmers and ranchers. I think at max they were like 4% of the whole population of the United States. They're infinitesimal example. Talk about a remnant. They're an infinitesimal example to the world of what actually should happen. If we can fortify that in the United States of America, again, look at that property law, get our people in the seats of decision to stop putting the agenda of globalization and start understanding their actual duty is to protect that property, and it's easy to do. We just need a lot of people that have this knowledge and force it back down into the local governments. You're going to push this whole globalization thing right out. You'll displace it again that quickly. But one of the tools they use as weapons is climate change. Now comes out here, for those of you keeping track, I just want to let you know, there's just so much real science that says, well, there's a sun, first of all, and that pretty much drives the whole of our existence is that sun. However nasty Grimner thinks it is, and it is, I mean, no one's going to mess with it. It's not very nice, but systems have been put in place to keep us in some sort of balance, pretty interesting balance, and yet there's people out there that believe that they can look at a chart based on a hypothesis. It's what's the thing about it? Is a statistical relationship to an unproven hypothesis. And I'm stretching to giving too much credit for it being a real hypothesis for science, because it's a fraud. It's a straight up fraud. This anthropomorphic global warming, man-made, M-A-N-N. Michael Mann made this up. He actually made it. He made it in the fact of promoting it and becoming this poster child for it. How can you possibly model this entire system? Is beyond me. It's always been beyond me. The science itself that I understand could not even come close to it. That these people are saying this, it shows they're lunatics, but they're proven that they can be a heretic within a system if it advances the system. Remember that climate alarmists finally admit we were wrong about global warming. This is an inescapable conclusion of a landmark paper published by Natural Geoscience. Actually, you have to pay for this. I wouldn't pay the $199 for it to read it, but that's how they get their money too. Just understand that this paper is discussed in these articles, find some around, that they actually admit they overstated the impact of carbon dioxide on climate and that the planet is warming more slowly than predicted. There's quite a few people that are analyzing this, and it's not just that they overpredicted. They're actually admitting that what they chose as these dynamics were improper as well. They then give themselves, say, well, we have more time. And this happens to come in at the time when they're going to have this Paris Agreement, which now Trump is saying he didn't necessarily say he doesn't agree to, but they want the United States to have a better deal, only means they agree with climate change and the Pope and the imposition of all this. Trump believes in this stuff, otherwise he would denounce it for the fraud that it is. And what this report is doing is admitting that that this whole point is wrong, but they're using it to say, oh, we get to have a little bit more time. We can be a little more lax on our standards. And what are they doing? They found out they jumped too much. They took too big a bite. And the United States, with Trump initially saying, we're not going to go there. And they said, okay, we're going to take a step back. This is how the amoeba works. And we're going to say, we'll rationalize, we can reduce those standards to you, and we're not going to have to push so hard on you managing your carbon budget. So this is a device, an admission, absolutely an admission that they're wrong, a fraud, no science, they're making it up, but they're doing it on the global scale to get capitulation and integration of the nations by their so-called leaders, their representatives. So very interesting. admission by the people that did this are the policymakers. I can't call them scientists, that the IPCC uses for these policies. Everybody, this is the core. These scientists that made this report are the ones that do the standard, the integrated global standard for y'all. And they're saying they messed up. They messed up in a couple of big ways. I'm telling you, it's just an outright fraud. I have a link. Embracing Uncertainty. Listen to this title, folks. Embracing Uncertainty in Climate Change Policy. Nature Climate Change, Nature Research. Well, it's not nature climate change. It's not nature research. The climate changes. They're not researching the climate changing. They're trying to enforce a policy, and they're looking at embracing the uncertainty in climate change policy. The uncertainty is the whole policy. They're attempting to take a step back and to try and make another foothold. That Trump even agrees to enter in, that the United States should be treated fairly under the Paris Agreement, agrees with this fraud. It agrees with the globalization that the Pope, the Vatican, agrees it's moving forward to integrate as a global religion, like Gorbachev was advancing the green religion. That's what this ends up being. It's all right here, falling, just being developed, blossoming right in our faces. It's really fascinating. Another corollary story, more spectacle, Arctic fraud at the New York Times. The New York Times just published another fake climate article, this time about the Arctic. They start the article with the claim that the satellites were first used to study the Arctic in 1979. You know, we had satellites before that. That's part of the claim. That's wrong. We went to the moon in 69. They had satellite imagery in 64. They do not show what the so-called fake news organization, the propagandists for integrating globalization in your life are telling the truth. Very, very interesting stuff. They have a lot of this article. I thought part of the reason why I put it together, I actually have it here. They got a lot of image clippings of all the old articles. And you can read all about it then. It's the stuff I used to read when I was coming through. This is the stuff where they were talking we're actually going into global cooling. But at that time, and I'm still thinking back, if I can, I'm not actually clear, but I think I've seen enough stories written. They were actually basing it on not a fabrication, but on actual things. And in fact, we are going into a cooling period. And that's why I told you if they start doing cloud chemtrailing, they could actually, and I think this would be the plan, hasten and deepen a natural occurring cooling sequence in the Earth, Sun, solar system, universe relationship. That's actually happening. It's a natural occurrence type variation. And it's going to go, they say, until 2030, 2050 now. It's just happening. It's just what happens. The anomalous magnetic structure on the Earth right now, the non-polar, or quadpolar to non-polar, the diminishing sun, all this interacts. When you have a system that has no powerful constraints, the system will do anomalous things. It's partly why we're seeing partly why we're seeing the storms now going to levels, the hurricanes going to Category 5, and now they're talking they're going to maybe go to make a Category 6. It's why we have floods that are just killing people, mountains sliding down. Oh, and I wanted to mention, here we're getting into the time here, folks. Watch out in California. This is maybe part of this reaction to the snowpack. Remember, I told you we're coming into that window. It's now September, going into October to December. We just had a big anomalous earthquake off the coast of California, 5.7, and it's on the outer fracture. But that may put pressure on the inside. I told you this tectonic hydrodynamics that I understood, I thought I could see back when I was looking at all this back in the 70s. I think there's a good potential for this to be responding. We may have just seen the first tick, so I can't know, but I just want you to be aware that if you feel shaken, and you see what's going on in Mexico as well, different dynamic, but be prepared. Start thinking for this stuff. Keep it in your mind, because not as a fear, as a preparation. If your mind is already thinking that direction, your feet will get you to the place it needs to be. You'll be grabbing people you need to grab to get them out. You put them in the right spot. You won't get in trouble. You'll understand all that. That's the only reason why I bring this up. But we're coming into that 5.7 earthquake in California kind of reminded me, well, we're in the window. Can't tell you if it's going to be fulfilled. I told you the Banda Aceh quake kind of changed the dynamic of the crust as I understood it was going on. It was predictable to some extent before that, and I've been kind of blind to a lot of that. I just want to warn you what one remainder thing that still holds out, one of a couple, it was this, what I consider the tectonic hydrodynamics. It has to do with deep water in tectonic fissures and faults issuing up or actually draining down. That is now coming out of the snowpacks. Now, the snowpacks did melt a little quick this year, so I'm not sure what was residue, but they didn't know how much was remaining. They couldn't tell. So there's still this big potential. I just want to call everybody's attention to it. The dynamics are fascinating to me, but not to the point where I can tell you. But here, there's a natural dynamic going on, a natural cyclical dynamic in the solar system. And I told you if they're feeding chemtrails up there and it actually starts to pollute the air, which looks like they've been doing it. Now, I mean, it used to be a question. Now, I don't think there's any question. They would actually reflect too much energy and hasten the cooling period and deepen it and lengthen it. So, let's hope for other smarter things prevailing, but they want to bring hardship on people because like you're seeing in Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, when those hurricanes scoured the land clean, destroyed everything, you're watching what chaos is. I can't call it anarchy because anarchy has to go against an actual structure and it only has a difference of opinion. You're watching literal chaos. You're actually what people are going to do when they have no food, no water, no nothing. When they listen to the law say to come and take their guns, and they didn't go look at the law, as Gary L. pointed out about what they did in one of the areas, I think Virgin Islands or somebody down there, Puerto Rico, they went, National Guard went and take everybody's guns. When you look at the law, though, it said it's only for companies, businesses that sell guns. And so innocent people gave so-called law-abiding people didn't know what it means. They gave their gun over. Now, those that didn't turn the gun that were bad guys are now coming out in gangs to steal what little bit is left from people there. And what they're finding out is what preppers, so-called preppers, discuss is what you need to do. You need to have a bunch of people that are organized in their own selves that they can pull together, pull resources, pull functionality, numbers count, organize good numbers count, no different than an opposing gang to protect yourself. But you watch the government fail absolutely. It's on you. You're watching the exact thing that governments want to put on people in a condition where they want to control them. You're just looking for a way out. You're just looking for the next meal. When you get yourself, and they get you into that austerity, that level of austerity, you're going to be looking for help. That's where they got the control. So the more times you can be non-dependent and in the system and self-reliant, which means you are looking for helping with other people, the better you're going to be able to resist the slow motion deflation of your life in the subject matter areas, at least of economy, politics, culture, education, environment, and other matters. What is international standards of austerity? It's on you. So it's on and on and stuff. So we have all this is climate change. This is the tool of the globalization. This is what the Pope agrees with. This is what the guy who's going to now stand as the conqueror of the Lutheran Protestant Presbyterian schism, which I think really wasn't so much that more than a plan, because see, they got able to extend out now and make a unity for everybody. Because what sense does it make to fight amongst each other? We have all the same faith, right? Well, that's what they go out on, but what they're actually talking about is the world standard of control. And they don't care to put any hardship on you to make that happen. Remember, the oath of the Jesuit. They're going to extirpate any opposition by any means. Now, one of the organizations in the United States that we talk about private property, production, watersheds, that is part and parcel to this globalization destruction, which you'd think it wouldn't be. But remember, I can't remember. It's an international group. I can't remember the name. This and a bunch of other agencies are part of this international group. I call it the Horde of International Water Trespassers, is the Forest Service. Water, improving flows and protecting flows of water is one of the main things that the Forest Service does in the United States of America over its forest reserves. And those forest reserves are not to be put into non-use. They were supposed to be put in improving production. But the Forest Service, as a part of keeping you out or wilding the United States subject to the Sustainable Development Principles and the biodiversity treaties and all the stuff that this Pope agrees you need to suffer to make this international global standard of austerity, you are now having to obey us. The Forest Service will obliterate roads. And I want to touch this story because it's an extension, how it affects you locally, or could, of this papal control, at least support of this globalization, the standardization and integration of everything. I've told you the property laws of the United States cannot be integrated lawfully. I've also told you find what they're doing and be the opposite. So if I just told you that the property laws of the United States can't be integrated globally, you now have found the line that you can stand on, behind, and be protected in if you can empower the laws, which are being eroded everywhere because the remedies are going away. And the only remedy we end up having is the mass of educated people that start finding out those in the seats of decision are in dereliction of their office, and we start to address the accountability problem. Then we do start to have a remedy at that point, but until then we have none. We just sit there and watch. But local Forest Service officials have erected signs indicating 14 roads will be obliterated over the next few weeks. Posted carcinite signs said, state, road to be obliterated in, with a handwritten time frame and date. Typically, the stated time frame is 2 to 3 weeks, and the date is late August. Now, what they said in this article is that the obliteration will be more like tank traps, gates, obstructions, boulders, this and that. They don't actually go through and destroy the road, and I find that fascinating that they don't spend that kind of energy and time. But they do consider to literally get rid of the road. And I have heard at times where they will literally obliterate the road. They usually block it off. I wanted to point something out. This is the extension of you not using and wasting your watershed. I just want to touch briefly and quickly. If you know your state's highway and trails laws, you will know the Forest Service has no jurisdiction or authority over those disposed lands of the public domain within the forest reserve. That power sits in the county to determine, but not unilaterally. You can't just open and close. So any road that's been obliterated for those counties that are out there, and this is in San Juan County, I guess on their website, they're telling me they're ignorant of their own authority. The seats of decision don't have a knowledge that the Forest Service cannot obliterate or even determine the continued use as a pre-existing claim of possession by the people of the county. It's not even in the county. That if the county people don't understand this and they don't start stepping up, and how fast I told you it is to stop this globalization or the wilding or the depopulation of places and the non-use of your watersheds and production and the actual wealth of making derivative economies from that, then you're in dereliction of your duty. You're in malfeasance, because there's no law to allow it. And by not moving forward, and anybody who sees this doesn't move the law forward within the county, they're allowing globalization. And you're doing it contrary to law. How simple that is. Thank you very much today. I hope something I said inspires you to do something. Grimner, thank you for reallibertymedia.com. All your work there in the archive and the blogcaster and everywhere else that you do on freedomsnetwork.com, and Jules at ucy.tv. Thank you for what you do there. Podcast, pastcast, and recast on Thursdays. For this broadcast on Thursdays, replayed on there. Thank you for terrestrial broadcasters, and I'll be here next week. Tech Diffs are nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Well, that's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole can.